Hello there, fellow Gothamites. Welcome to another episode of the ARKHAM Sessions. Once again, I'm Brian Ward, and as always, I'm joined by the psychologist to the superheroes and their villains, Dr. Andrea Letamendi.
Hello.
Andrea, we've got a pretty monumental episode ahead of us this week, not because it's so heavy on psychology, but because it introduces the world to one of its most interesting henchmen turned villainous in her own right, Harley Quinn.
Right. This is the first appearance of Harley Quinn in Batman the Animated Series.
We're, of course, talking about the episode Joker's Favor, written by none other than Mr. Paul Dini and directed by Boyd Kirkland. And we open up in traffic, something to which you and I, as Los Angelinos, are very well accustomed. We hear over the radio that the Joker
has escaped today. He is armed and considered extremely dangerous.
And because we've dealt with the Joker before, with his attempts to blow up trains just to throw a pie into the face of the Caped Crusader, and looting while poisoning the citizens of Gotham with his Joker gas, and then trying to blow up a children's birthday party and drown Batman in Houdini's Chinese water torture cell, you and I know this guy's pretty dangerous. And to recap for the audience up to this point, you'd gone back and forth from a possible borderline personality disorder to antisocial personality disorder. Really quick for folks that may have forgotten, what is the difference here?
Right. So borderline personality disorder is a pervasive pattern of instability in interpersonal relationships, self-image, and emotions. We've talked about personality disorders before. Those are lifelong conditions. So it's basically a personality disorder is different from another mental health illness in that it is pretty much a core part of a person's emotions, cognition, and behaviors. So borderline personality disorder has to do with a person's inability to maintain stable, healthy relationships, a very emotionally, I would say, someone with an inability to regulate their own emotions, and some level of impulsivity. So when we saw this with the Joker, he was being quite violent toward Batman and Robin, but essentially he was luring Batman to him to spend Christmas Eve with him. So it was this love-hate thing he had going with him.
Right.
On the other hand, we talked about the Joker having antisocial personality disorder. Again, another personality disorder. But antisocial personality disorder is characterized by having basically a disregard for other people's feelings, a disregard for rules and norms, someone who breaks laws, someone who is callous, someone who is selfish and grandiose. And we talked about how that might actually fit the Joker because of his lack of remorse, his deceitfulness, his, manipulation of other people, and certainly his selfishness and his aim to go out and steal and basically take advantage of other people.
So while we're stuck in traffic, we settle in with Charlie Collins, a man who's a bit of a sap, who's clearly the kind of guy who just lets people walk all over him.
Perfect ending to an awful day.
Yeah, when we're introduced to Charlie, we see him driving on the freeway, and like many of us, he's frustrated, just wants to get home, he's irritable, and he's yelling at the cars around him. But there's something a little different about Charlie. He's particularly self-pitying, he's insecure, and he is talking about how his life just isn't what he wants it to be.
Boss turns me down for a raise, a kid needs braces, and Bonnie's making meatloaf for dinner. At what point exactly did I become life's punching bag?
And so there's this sense of, like you said, this passive personality, as well as the sense that he doesn't feel like he has control over his life. And I think it's important to know that as we are introduced to this episode, because something very interesting happens to Charlie. And I think that the writers wanted us to know that he is essentially easily influenced and susceptible to someone like the Joker.
And eventually, on the road, Charlie's just had enough and snaps.
Well, people say things like someone snaps or they went off the deep end. But that's not really accurate. People do not snap. That's not really what happens.
So what does it mean for someone who just breaks, who lets the rage?
Well, for some people, there is a complex series of events or series of behaviors that lead up to that, what you call snapping or having a breakdown, or losing it. And for others, they just simply have a moment where they lose control and they yell or, act in a very irresponsible, impulsive, and sometimes it can be in a little bit of an aggressive way. But again, if that's outside of their normal behavior, we wouldn't necessarily say they snapped.
Now, for someone like you who is a psychologist, how bad is it for people to bottle up these emotions? Because clearly that's sort of what's happened. It's boiled to the point that it just comes out of him and he just gets angry and decides he's not going to take it anymore. Is that bad for people to do? Is it something we should worry about, or is it just everyday nature?
Right. Well, again, on the extreme end, there are cases where someone has literally gotten a gun or a weapon and injured and even murdered a number of people. We've seen this on the news. We see this regularly, actually. Mm-hmm. And again, usually there is a history there of mental illness, of substance abuse, of some other kind of precipitating event, a history. So again, that's not a person who snaps. That's a person who is coming to terms and making a firm decision on how they want to deal with their emotions and how they want to deal with their experiences. A lot of times, those are folks who have gotten a diagnosis or have been through some kind of mental health screening or treatment and were not successfully treated. So, again, a lot of times there's a mental health history there. On the other hand, as we're talking about, there are some more normal experiences of bottling up emotions. And when we refer to that kind of snapping, that's more commonplace and that tends to not go towards violence, but it does, I would say it's something that's maladaptive or not constructive, right? So suddenly yelling at your coworker or boss, pulling off to the side of the road and yelling at another driver. Or, we've seen sometimes athletes get really irritable and go after another athlete. So again, those are within the normal realm of getting overworked emotionally, and it can come from bottling up those emotions.
And unfortunately, Charlie couldn't have chosen a worse person to quote unquote snap against. He chases down the Joker and decides to unload on him verbally.
I cussed out the Joker.
Much like you were just describing, the
Right.
kind of person who bottles something up and then just lets it come out, not violently, but verbally. And once he notices that it's the Joker, naturally he backs down. But the Joker won't quite let it go, and he chases Charlie down. Finally, he catches Charlie, and instead of killing him, makes him a deal.
I'll let you off if you promise to do a little favor for me.
We jump to 2 years later, and Charlie has changed his name
My name's Don.
and moved his family out of Gotham to Ohio.
Like you do.
Like you
once
do.
you're threatened by the Joker.
If there's anywhere I'm going to go, it's Ohio. All of this in hopes that the Joker won't be able to find him to collect on his favor. And so far, it actually appears to have worked. But Commissioner Gordon is being honored, and the Joker has escaped just for the occasion.
I arranged another early parole as soon as I heard about Gordon's testimonial.
And he's joined by a new right-hand man. Or
Woman.
Harley Quinn makes her very first appearance.
It is to laugh, huh, Mr. J?
Drea, without getting into what we know about Harley's backstory, because obviously Harley is a pretty big character at this point, but of course this is her introduction, so we have no prior history, but of course you and I know a lot about Harley Quinn at this point. But because we don't see it in this episode, per the rules of the podcast, we can't discuss it. What kind of personality does it take to voluntarily get this close to someone like the Joker in this kind of capacity?
Well, we understand that she's special. He has other henchmen. We've seen them. And even in this episode, we see a couple of the guys, incidentally, reading Tiny Toons comics.
Which, if you remember, is the second time we've seen that.
Yeah.
A security guard was reading Tiny Toon Adventures in the first episode on Leather Wings.
It seems like the only comic book you can read in Gotham City is Tiny Toon Adventures. This is the first time that we're seeing a female henchwoman with
True.
the Joker. And this one is all dressed up in her Harley Quinn outfit, which we have come to really recognize and love. But at the time, it's unique compared to the rest of his crew. And we're introduced to her as someone who is close to him. She's seen cheering him on.
Hear, hear!
She is sort of his
Fan.
Yeah, and she's cutting his hair, and you get the sense that he trusts her. She's up close to his face with scissors. So it's a unique relationship, and I think we're supposed to be intrigued by her. Now, as you said, she was probably created to be a one-off character, and as we know, this was not the last we'll see of her.
Right.
But in this particular episode, we do get to see that she is a person that's close to him, one that he confides in. He gives her the biggest jobs, the best jobs. I don't know how to say that without it sounding kind of creepy.
Right.
But you get the sense that they're close, and it works well.
Like, what kind of personality does it take to get yourself involved with someone like this?
Now, okay, but let's not forget that in true form, the Joker is charismatic and particularly charming. One facet of antisocial personality disorder is someone who is so manipulative and, I guess, is able to emulate empathy and emotions to the degree that people are actually fascinated and charmed by them. So it wouldn't be odd for a young woman to be interested in spending time with him and to find him to be charismatic and fun and enjoyable to be around. She might also be a thrill seeker, in which case hanging out with the Joker might be right up her alley. So it's not too odd, and I think that it fits their personalities well so far.
Perfect. So back to the story. The Joker calls on Charlie. Turns out not only did the name change and move not throw the Joker off, he's actually known where Charlie was at all times. He's just been waiting, which might be even more torturous, letting your victim think they're safe only to make that deadly call later. Charlie returns to Gotham and is finding himself with thoughts about how to get in touch with Batman or inform the police somehow. But before he can do either, Harley, out of makeup, mind you, and dressed as a chauffeur, picks him up at the airport. This is when Charlie learns of Joker's favor. All the Joker really wants Charlie to do is infiltrate Gordon's reception and then open a door for them so that the Joker's crazy clown catering can come through with a gigantic
you almost made it.
With a gigantic cake. And that's it. And he does. He opens the door and Harley waltzes in dressed as a uniformed cop, wheeling in a cake. Bruce, of course, couldn't stay for dinner, being busy and all.
The life of a busy socialite.
Charlie's figured out a way, however, of calling out to the Batman. Lucky for Charlie, he's just down the street. When the Joker's gas goes off in the ceremony, freezing everyone, including Commissioner Gordon, Joker pops up from the cake and has Harley place an award armed with a miniature bomb to the Commissioner's chest. Naturally, Batman arrives in the nick of time and sends the bomb out, blowing up the Joker's and Harley's escape van. Now, Charlie then takes this opportunity to tell Batman all about his debt to the Joker and the harassment, and then Batman takes down the Joker's thugs, including Harley Quinn, and chases the Joker, and this is where everything gets a little bizarre. Joker leads Batman into an exhibit of an ancient temple.
Completely accurate, right down to the poison-tipped dart.
Who does this. Seriously, I mean, I grew up, I was just outside of DC. The Smithsonian doesn't even go to the level of recreation that, you put the poison-tipped darts in the booby trap holes. And
Maybe in the event that the Joker and Batman are going to duke it out in the museum, then you would really want all of that.
The best part is
hand.
that the Joker knows that this is the case, but Batman doesn't. Like Joker is caught up on the links that the museum or whomever they have taken to make this happen. And the Joker nearly escapes until Charlie meets him outside, armed with a bomb of his own. And Charlie informs the Joker that he fully intends to blow him up and that he's happy to go along with it if it means getting rid of the Joker. And he also says something that I find interesting here.
I can destroy a man's dreams too.
And the Joker seems to be genuinely scared, which I kind of find funny, mainly because this is one of the Joker's bombs. And when the bomb explodes, we see that it was a big gag bomb, which means the Joker's the one that rigged it, and yet he doesn't recognize it. And there's no way that Charlie can know. So this scene suggests one of a couple of different things realistically to me. One, that Charlie thought it was real all along and was perfectly prepared to go up with it. And two, the Joker essentially plays Russian roulette with his bombs because he doesn't even seem to know or have any idea which ones are real and which ones aren't. And either way, Batman finds this to be hilarious.
I think that's the most disturbing part of all this. You have the Joker on his knees pleading the Batman to help him, which we rarely see.
Right.
And then Charlie, who, minutes ago was this passive, helpless guy, suddenly holding this bomb saying he's going to blow all of them up.
But again, he's a guy who has decided at this moment he's simply not going to take it anymore.
Right. And now, during all this, Batman just kind of chuckles in a weird way. And either he's known the whole time that was not a real bomb and he's enjoying the Joker.
Even Batman looks pretty.
I was going to say he's enjoying the Joker finally feeling fear and feeling that he's in danger. But as you said, he likely didn't know that the bomb was just a play bomb. Mm-hmm. And so was going through a fear of his own. But ultimately, he begins laughing once he realizes that it's fake.
Right.
And of course, Charlie says,
I had a good teacher.
Right.
Which is kind of creepy that he, in his attempt to get revenge, he chooses to do what the Joker does, which is to terrorize and instill fear and threaten someone's life. And it worked to the degree that the Joker was fearful and pleading for his life.
So at this point, now that Charlie has gone off in traffic and now has decided that he's not going to be taken advantage of anymore and actually, once again, I'll use the term, even though I know it's incorrect, he snaps and decides he's going to use a bomb to take out the Joker. We can now basically say that Charlie has a history of, these breaks.
No, I would disagree. I don't think he does. He had some instances of road rage. He was in a time when he first encountered the Joker. He was experiencing a lot of helplessness, feeling that he didn't have control over his, he was sort of complaining about, my wife makes food that I don't like. I'm not getting promoted. Everyone's out to get me. I never get rewarded. He calls himself a punching bag.
Right.
So, no, that's not pathological in any way. However, after his encounter with the Joker, which I think we could consider that a trauma that he experienced, when the Joker puts his hand into his jacket and pretends to take out a weapon and then just kind of takes out a pen or a card and wants to get this guy's address. Charlie legitimately thought that he was going to die there. So then he spent the next 2 years potentially being fearful that the Joker would find him again. And so while his revenge act, if you will, on the Joker seems extreme, and we even for a moment think he's going to not just commit murder, but also commit suicide, we then later realize he may have known more about the facts of that situation. He may actually have known that that bomb was not real. I wouldn't consider this a psychotic break or some kind of other mental health related episode. I would say that he had a plan, and he was full of adrenaline. He didn't know if it would work, but he attempted it. And it was the one time where he finally had control over what would happen to him.
So, Andrea, we've talked about this week's victim, Charlie. We've discussed a little about what we can about Harley. Let's touch on the Joker here. This was our 4th time covering the Joker, and as you mentioned before, or as we mentioned before, you've sort of straddled the diagnoses of borderline and antisocial personality disorder for the most part. Are we still hovering in this particular area? Are you seeing anything different? Or is it pretty consistent?
I don't know that we've made much progress because, again, let's start with antisocial personality disorder. Again, a pervasive disregard for right and wrong and frequent violation of laws. A person with this problem often lies, steals, causes fights and rifts with others. They have a disregard for the rights and feelings of others and often deceives and intimidates other people, sometimes just for the thrill of that.
I would say this all applies to this particular episode.
Exactly. And again, some people with this particular personality disorder display superficial charm and flatter others. And we saw that in this episode with Harley Quinn. On the other hand, yes, some males with borderline personality disorder do exhibit some very similar characteristics that we're seeing in the Joker in this episode. One is the impulsivity, the emotional instability. Sometimes it seems that he's experiencing pleasure, especially when he's terrorizing Charlie. On the other hand, the Joker is presenting us with some interesting characteristics like planning. For 2 years, he's watching this guy. He's planning to call upon him. I wouldn't say that he's maintaining a relationship with him, but he continues to watch him, and Charlie doesn't know this, so it's not like he's terrorizing him for 2 years. So that future-oriented type of planning is not really as common for ASPD.
But we have seen that it's sort of Joker's MO, is the future planning. I mean, just about every plot that we've seen him has been very intricate.
Right. This is true. And when I know you and I read a lot about serial killers and
all the time.
All the time. And many serial killers have some characteristics of antisocial personality disorder. And we, based on your experience, in my reading, I find that there's a lot of impulsivity. Like Dahmer would go out that night and look for some guy to then take back home and have his way with him and murder him and cut his body into bits. In my remembering reading about him, he wasn't a planner. He wasn't organizing and trying to scheme well ahead of time. He just was more impulsive with his murders. What was your take on some of the serial killers that you've read about?
I think you're right in that very few people have selected someone and followed them for long periods of time, but usually the victims meet a certain criteria. So while they might be someone they just saw on the street for the first time, they are at least planning ahead enough to know the types of people they're looking for.
Right, but it's sort of first come, first serve. First redhead that I see, first brunette woman that meets this criteria. Sometimes not. I mean, a lot of times in the serial killer sort of handbook that I've read, there are often several factors. I mean, it could be
it could be a matter, it's not necessarily the first redhead I see. It's the first redhead I see alone, or the first
Right.
redhead I see in a position of vulnerability.
Yeah.
Or the first one that I see so it's not necessarily that's the first one I saw. So that's the first one, that's the one I'm going to go get. It's not quite so impulsive that way, or
So it's more
obsessive
like
compulsive
So it's
that
more
way.
like the first redhead I see that I can kill without getting caught.
Sure.
Right. With the Joker, we see, rather than this more impulsive behavior, we see some, as I said, future orientation, planning, scheming, and it can go on for years.
Right.
So it's an interesting characteristic that he has. And getting back to when we were talking about borderline personality disorder, it's interesting that in his time of feeling threatened, the Joker was very clingy to Batman. Now, we all would be. We would want Batman to save us, which we've seen commonly in BTAS. The Joker, when his life is threatened, will reach out to the Batman and will plead for him to help him.
Batman! Batman!
And we
Right.
do see those moments where he does have this real or imagined closeness with Batman and believes that Batman cares enough about him that he'll save him.
Right.
And again, what's interesting about that is that is more in line with borderline personality disorder, which is characterized by that unstable and intense emotional relationship with other people.
Is it possible to have both?
Well, it's always possible to have more than one mental health condition. Those two don't really go together because one condition is particularly, it's characterized by having lack of empathy, lack of emotions and not recognizing emotions in others. The other condition is characterized by someone who has the need for relationships, but doesn't know how to regulate their own emotions and to have stable relationships with others. So while across the board, yes, you can have more than one condition, these two don't really tend to go together. And one of the reasons the Joker is a fascinating character is that he seems to have both.
Right. So those two diagnoses will continue to battle it out in the future episodes.
Well, I would say he fits more with antisocial personality disorder, which I will stick with.
Okay. So behind the scenes, a couple of interesting things here. One, Ed Begley Jr. returns to play Charlie. You'll remember Begley played Germs in the Feet of Clay episodes. And Harley, as we mentioned, makes her first of many appearances here. But as Paul Dini pointed out, Harley Quinn was loosely based on his friend Arlene Sorkin, who played Calliope Jones with that very familiar voice on the soap opera Days of Our Lives. And she also wrote for, get this, Tiny Toon Adventures.
What?
So it's all coming together. Also, while Christmas with the Joker was the first produced appearance of the Joker, this episode was actually the first aired appearance of the Joker. So imagine watching it on television and seeing this as your first impression of the Joker. Kind of a dynamic entrance. And as people who listen to the podcast know, sometimes I like to go to the research, and I like to find things that we see in these episodes in real life situations. In this particular case, I want to talk about the gas that Joker uses to paralyze his victims. And when I say paralyze, I mean literally everyone freezes into place. Now, to research this, I actually went to one of my favorite books written by Dr. D.P. Lyle, who is he's a medical examiner who consults with lots of TV shows and writers, who's written a fantastic series of books for fiction writers called Forensics in Fiction, Clever, Intriguing, and Downright Odd Questions from Crime Writers. And in this book, I have found someone asked the following question. Is there a drug that paralyzes yet leaves the victim fully awake? Sounds like something we just saw in this episode.
It does.
And ultimately, what it comes down to is, yes, there are drugs that do this. In fact, there are several. They are neuromuscular paralytics. And now the difference between the real-life drugs and the ones we see in the episode is Joker uses a gas, whereas these must be given by intravenous or intramuscular injection.
Okay, so that means you have to actually inject it into the bloodstream.
Correct.
Or into
the muscle.
tissue.
Yes.
Okay.
And they don't act like sedatives or narcotics, such as morphine, alcohol, or Valium. So the victim is actually wide awake. However, it actually relaxes every muscle in the body, including those that allow you to breathe. So typically, someone who is given this sort of drug would die if they weren't given some other way of breathing, such as a ventilator or something along those lines. So could the Joker use a gas to paralyze everyone? Probably not. But there are, in fact, drugs that could be used that would paralyze Commissioner Gordon and allow him to see everything that's going on, even Harley putting a bomb onto him. Although they would have to go a lot deeper, and they would have to actually give him a way of breathing so that he could enjoy his own.
Oh, I see.
Death.
Okay. So what we saw was actually there isn't anything like that out there.
Nothing like that exactly. But I was surprised to find that there are things that you could actually give someone that would keep them fully awake, fully aware, and
then kill them, apparently.
and then kill them. Yeah, unless you had them on a ventilator, and then
I see.
because these are often used in the cases of surgeries and things like that.
Well, thanks for that.
Yeah, sure. Do you have any more for the week?
I just want to mention that May, of course, is National Mental Health Awareness Month. All month long, folks are able to access new information, research, resources, suicide hotline information. A lot of great resources are now available online, and the great website called mentalhealthamerica.net is my plug for the week, I would say. It's a great place, as I said, to find those resources. Again, mentalhealthamerica.net. And if you click on Mental Health Awareness Month, then you can access some of those resources.
So that's it for this week. Join us next week for Vendetta, which features one of your personal faves, Drea, Killer Croc.
Yay! Finally.
Till then, you know how to find us.
But what if they don't?
Oh, all right. You can find us on Twitter as @ARKHAM Sessions.
I'm on Twitter @ArkhamAsylumDoc.
And I am @BWard028. You can come like us on Facebook, and if you have any questions, comments, or praise, naturally, you can email us at arkhamsessions@gmail.com. And I highly recommend you check out Drea's website, underthemaskonline.com, for more on the psychology of your favorite heroes and villains.
Thank you.
Till next week, I'm Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Andrea Letamendi.
And we are
the ARKHAM Sessions. The Joker because of his lack of remorse, his deceitfulness, his manipulation of other people, and certainly his selfishness and his aim to go out and steal and basically take advantage of other people.
So while we're stuck in traffic, we settle in with Charlie Collins, a man who's a bit of a sap, who's clearly the kind of guy who just lets people walk all over him.
Perfect ending to an awful day.
Yeah, when we're introduced to Charlie, we see him driving on the freeway. And like many of us, he's frustrated, just wants to get home. He's irritable, and he's yelling at the cars around him. But there's something a little different about Charlie. He's particularly self-pitying, he's insecure, and he is talking about how his life just isn't what he wants it to be.
Boss turns me down for a raise, a kid needs braces, and Bonnie's making meatloaf for dinner. At what point exactly did I become life's punching bag?
And so there's this sense of, like you said, this passive personality, as well as the sense that he doesn't feel like he has control over his life. And I think it's important to know that as we of a person's emotions, cognition, and behaviors. So borderline personality disorder has to do with a person's inability to maintain stable, healthy relationships, a very emotionally, I would say, someone with an inability to regulate their own emotions, and some level of impulsivity. So when we saw this with the Joker, he was being quite violent toward Batman and Robin, but essentially he was luring Batman to him to spend Christmas Eve with him. So it was this love-hate thing he had going with him.
Right.
On the other hand, we talked about the Joker having antisocial personality disorder. Again, another personality disorder. But antisocial personality disorder is characterized by having basically a disregard for other people's feelings, a disregard for rules and norms, someone who breaks laws, someone who is callous, someone who is selfish and grandiose. And we talked about how that might actually fit are introduced to this episode, because something very interesting happens to Charlie. And I think that the writers wanted us to know that he is essentially easily influenced and susceptible to someone like the Joker.
And eventually, on the road, Charlie's just had enough and snaps.
Well, people say things like someone snaps or they went off the deep end, but that's not really accurate. People do not snap. That's not really what happens.
So what does it mean for someone who just breaks, who lets the rage?
Well, for some people, there is a complex series of events or series of behaviors that lead up to that, what you call snapping or having a breakdown or losing it. And for others, they just simply have a moment where they lose control and they yell or, act in a very irresponsible, impulsive, and sometimes it can be in a little bit of an aggressive way. But again, if that's outside of their normal behavior, we wouldn't necessarily say they snapped.
Now, for someone like you who is Hello there, fellow Gothamites. Welcome to another episode of the ARKHAM Sessions. Once again, I'm Brian Ward, and as always, I'm joined by the psychologist to the superheroes and their villains, Dr. Andrea Letamendi.
Hello.
Andrea, we've got a pretty monumental episode ahead of us this week, not because it's so heavy on psychology, but because it introduces the world to one of its most interesting henchmen turned villainous in her own right, Harley Quinn.
Right. This is the first appearance of Harley Quinn in Batman the Animated Series. We're,
of course, talking about the episode Joker's Favor, written by none other than Mr. Paul Dini and directed by Boyd Kirkland. And we open up in traffic, something to which you and I, as Los Angelinos, are very well accustomed. We hear over the radio that the Joker
has escaped today. He is armed and considered extremely dangerous.
And because we've dealt with the Joker before, with his attempts to blow up trains just to throw a pie into the face of the Cape Crusader, and looting while poisoning the citizens of Gotham with his Joker gas, and then trying to blow up a children's birthday party and drown Batman in Houdini's Chinese water torture cell, you and I know this guy's pretty dangerous. And to recap for the audience up to this point, you'd gone back and forth from a possible borderline personality disorder to antisocial personality disorder. Really quick for folks that may have forgotten, what is the difference here?
Right. So borderline personality disorder is a pervasive pattern of instability in interpersonal relationships, self-image, and emotions. We've talked about personality disorders before. Those are lifelong conditions. So it's basically a personality disorder is different from another mental health illness in that it is pretty much a core part